militarization was particularly in this region and of course in South Asia. It was a common factor for many years, many decades, particularly in that era of Cold War, and after that, because of the militarization, the institutions were destroyed and the countries could not come out with more reforms. So the military still has its role in the political affairs because it has ruled many decades over there. So countries who are here, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Philippines and Indonesia, they remain into that militarization. So when it has come, so one thing was very much common that the militarization has destroyed the every fabric of the society, every fabric, not only the rule of law or the constitution of or the judicial system, but every fabric of the country, and that is why that it is still remain under the militarization. And particularly if I talk of Pakistan, then still in Pakistan military rules, and in recent days we have given much power to the military, even by the constitution that military can have this military courts. So in presence of independent judiciary, there are military courts for the trial of terrorists, but still that terrorists are not tried into that. So this is the way of having this. And what we see in the Philippines, that Marcos went, and after that we still can't see any change into that. And the same complaints what Bangladesh is having, all those things. So this is and whenever militarization is there or military takes over the power, so the fundamental rights are abrogated, totally not allowed to have, and then there is emergency in the country. So the evolution of the laws or the development of laws were stopped in the country. So that is the thing, and because of the short of the time, I would like to the panelists to talk on that. So can we
militarization in the Philippines, particularly militarization of the police force, but also of civilian institutions. In order to understand why things are the way they are in the Philippines, we have to go back to history, particularly the colonial history of the Philippines. Historically, the current police force in the Philippines was formed during the period of American occupation. So that was at the turn of the last century, from 1899 onwards. So because of massive popular resistance led by the Philippine revolutionary government, the American occupiers formed the Philippine Scouts. So this is a police force, a constabulary. The officers were American officers, and the troops were drawn from the local population. And their main mission was to assist the Americans in fighting and neutralizing the revolutionary forces. So it was the police from its inception in the Philippines. It was really a tool for turned against the people themselves in order to establish American colonial rule. So from the Philippine Scouts, it became the Philippine Constabulary. And after independence from U.S. colonial rule in 1946, the mission of the police continued to include counterinsurgency because of of widespread poverty in the Philippines. Historically, throughout the 20th century and up to the present, there has been mainly agrarian or peasant-based armed revolutionary movement in the Philippines. And so it has always been part of the mission of the police force in the Philippines to counter and suppress this movement. In the period of so in other words, throughout its history, the police force has always had a military component, which is counterinsurgency. But in the post-war period, the division has always been that the armed forces of the Philippines, the military, is given the primary responsibility for counterinsurgency, and the police force is given a secondary role or a supporting role. The militarization of the police became particularly intense during the martial law period. So that's from 1971 to 1982, when President Ferdinand Marcos, declared one-man rule, abolished Congress, and ruled as a dictator. The main justification that Marcos gave for declaring martial law was mainly to counteract the communist insurgency. So both the military and the police were very critical instruments in enforcing martial rule. So the torture, for instance, became institutionalized and could be done with impunity by the military as well as the police forces during the period of martial rule. After the overthrow of Marcos in 1986, a new constitution was written, and there was an emphasis on insisting upon the principle of civilian supremacy over the military, and there were efforts to insist on the civilian character of the police, so that the old police force under martial law was abolished, and in 1991 the Philippine National Police was created by law. So again, the emphasis was that this was supposed to be civilian in character. One of the key reforms was that the officers of the police force would no longer be trained in the Philippine Military Academy. Up to this point, the officers of both the armed forces and the police force were trained under in the Philippine Military Academy, which is patterned after West Point in the United States. And so from 1991, Philippine National Police Academy was established. So, but however, this means that up to 1991, graduates of the Philippine Military Academy could still serve in the Philippine National Police. And so the graduates of the Military Academy will retire out of the police force by 2026. No? So up to now, all the top positions and the key positions in the police force continue to be held by graduates of the Philippine Military Academy. And so someone mentioned earlier that in the Philippines, police officers continue to hold military ranks. strictly speaking, that's not true. Since 1991, precisely in order to insist on the civilian character of the police force, that practice was abolished, and the ranks in the police forces are civilian ranks. So, Chief of the Philippine National Police, Director General, Senior Inspector, and so on. However, in the popular culture, in public discussions, public debate, and so on, the police officers continue to be referred to by their military ranks. So it's an indication of how pervasive the culture, the military culture, is still in the Philippines, within the military itself, and even in the general society. Okay, let's see. So in the early 1990s, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the communist regimes in Eastern Europe, there was a weakening in the communist revolutionary movement in the Philippines. And so the Philippine government decided at that time to take away primary responsibility for counterinsurgency from the armed forces of the Philippines. So they turned it over to the police force. However, after a few years, this was seen as an unsuccessful policy. The communist movement continued to grow, and so it was reverted back to the armed forces of the Philippines. Counterinsurgency was reverted back to the armed forces of the Philippines. And so now the current policy is still the AFP, the armed forces, has primary responsibility for counterinsurgency. Police have a supporting role. Currently, in the police organization, there are units called the regional public safety battalions of the police. So in every administrative region, there are 18 in the Philippines. The Philippine National Police has a regional public safety battalion whose main mission is counterinsurgency. In other words, the military component is still pretty much built into the structure of the organization of the Philippine National Police. One other aspect that I can talk about with regard to cooperation between the military and the police in the Philippines is in the legal arena. Whereas, for example, under the previous regime, the presidency of Gloria Arroyo, her government became notorious for extrajudicial killings and disappearances, targeting activists, dissidents, those who protested against the administration and the government's policies. There was because of the international clamor and outrage against the killings, the extrajudicial killings in the Philippines, towards the end of Arroyo's administration, there was a marked shift. There was a decline in the number of killings, but an increase in the number of cases of trumped-up charges, of usually non-bailable criminal charges being filed against activist leaders, trade union leaders, peasant leaders, women activists, student activists, and so on. So there was, in other words, there was a shift towards making use of the justice system in order to harass and to jail so-called enemies of the state. So by filing of these trumped-up charges, This practice has continued under the Aquino administration. Um, this tactic continues to be used jointly by the police, the military, and in cooperation with the Department of Justice, because the charges are, very in almost all cases they're preposterous. One example would be the case of a teacher union organizer in one of the provinces in the Philippines, who actually works for the government and does his organizing part-time, but he was charged with participating in an ambush by the New People's Army that happened in another province and during a time when he was obviously at work. Now, however, so this was filed, he was arrested by the police, and charges were filed by the military against him, and the prosecutor recommended the filing of charges. So he's under detention, and so because of the slowness of the justice system in the Philippines, where on average a trial will take up to 3 years before before judgment. So a large number of activists against whom these false charges are filed are under detention for many years before their cases get dismissed. So this is another tactic that is being used by the police and military against perceived critics of the government. So I guess mainly those are the things that I would like to share with respect to the militarization of the police. So essentially, the militarization of the police is in the context of its continuing role in counterinsurgency in the Philippines. Well, of course, in the course of the counterinsurgency efforts of government in the Philippines, women have been targeted and victimized. I can cite, for instance, the case of Andrea Rosal. So Andrea Rosal is an activist who is the daughter, who happened to be the daughter of perhaps the most famous communist rebel leader in the Philippines. So she happened to be the daughter. So she was also arrested. Trumped up charges of murder were filed against her. When she was arrested, she happened to be 9 months pregnant. But because while in detention, medical services were denied her, that she lost her baby. The baby died. No, so well, that's an instance where the ill treatment of prisoners has victimized women in particular. It's one of the more well-known cases in the Philippines.
It is also observed in case of Pakistan that disappearances was actually very rare, but whenever military comes, particularly during the last Musharraf period, it has increased manifold. And first time people have seen that disappearances, how it is occurring, and how military government is having that power with impunity. And also they have introduced the extrajudicial killings to eliminate that evidences of disappearances. So this is because of the militarization, and again I will not say more, but I would request Dr. Chowdhury from Bangladesh to talk on this.
Well, you know that in 1971 we fought against Pakistan. Many things we did not like about Pakistan. One is the militarization. We thought they are the real evil. But after 40 years, we realized, my government, that means, well, as you know, most undemocratic government, they realize. Is that on? On? 40 years later, presently the most undemocratic government, unelected government without vote, they realize militarization is a good thing. From Pakistan, we can borrow it. We can follow the Pakistani traditions. Now, I give you a few examples how the militarizations happen. Military officers have been transferred to the deputy battalion. They are not answerable to any law. Recently, almost 7 army officers were involved in killing a lawyer and other thing in Nayanganj, the business city is close to Dhaka. And there are many of the extrajudicial killing, disappearances, RAB is directly involved. That means RAB, which has been controlled and run by the military officers. This is but now army is going more into the business, militarization in business. They are running university, they are running medical colleges. Mainly it is not to help them, it is the officers, army officers, their daughters and sons, they can get, instead of competing in the public universities, they are having their own universities but they are not joining army. They are going abroad and other things. This is one thing. They are also being allowed to have their own banks. Most popular thing is the peacekeeping. They said like Bangladesh soon will get another award for our contribution in peacekeeping. People are happy, government is happy, government promoting it very well. They said we are earning money. He said it is one of our big foreign exchange income. But in reality, this is another lie. Their total income earned by the peacekeeping is not even 1,000% of our total export income. Bangladesh, their total income is presently every yearly is really about $40 billion yearly our export. If you compare with this, the income through army is not even 1,000th of 1%. But even then it is promoted in such a way, army is such a good thing, we are earning money by keeping, but some of our army, unfortunately, not many, at least a couple have been named, which have been involved in rape and other things in Africa. I hope it is not true, but it has been reported. It has been reported in the army. Our army work in close relationship with India, UK, and USA. So for their own political interests, they continue it. The corruption in Bangladesh, the one thing our friend in the morning was telling that we are real champion is the corruption, not in the infant mortality. Infant mortality, we are not even Kerala, Cuba you cannot compare. Even Sri Lanka we cannot compare. You cannot compare with Malaysia. We are far behind them, our infant mortality and maternal mortality. What Amartya Sen, whatever he has written, I knew him quite well, I would say, because he was born very place close to where I work, and I was also one of the reviewer of his original awardee. So I have got he has got attachment. After all, he's a Bangladeshi man. So he is giving us an extra credit, not a real that credit that we deserve. In corruption, definitely we have championed. A country, a small country, still really poor country, I would say. Just now we are coming out of our poverty. Almost 30,000 crore been been corrupt money taken by Prime Minister, her family, her friends, and other peoples. And Finance Minister thinks it's a small amount of money. Give an example, our Padda Bridge, which will connect the two parts of the Bangladesh. Original budget, when the World Bank was involved, its budget was only $7 billion. Now with the Army's involvement and China, it has been raised to 30 billion. So you calculate how much money Army will make. So these sorts of militarizations is very dangerous in that. In 1985, I was awarded Magsaysay. Along with me, a gentleman from Malaysia, Dato Nuruddin, a government official, got the award. So I said, hello, what did you do that you should get the award? At least I work in the village, I left, I was joking with him. But what did you do? He said, look, I didn't do anything, but only thing as an auditor, I found out the maximum corruption occurs in the army. I said, what? He said, army is the most corrupt and their army is not accounted for. I said, really? He said, yes. He said, when Mr. Nuruddin was made Auditor General, so he said, look, what do? I have got no job, Comptroller General. I better check wherever the maximum budget been spent. As you know that our military expenditure is neither been publicly audited, is neither been discussed in the parliament. It's only one figure. That much is the allotment, and this has been properly used. What do you mean by properly used? This is another farce. So Mr. Nuruddin told me, so when he wanted to audit, he said, look, I better do as I am the Auditor General. He said, no, you can't do it. He said, why not? This is security. He said, what security? I don't want to see where you have kept your arms and ammunition, but I want to see that you have purchased this properly been tendered, properly been audited. He said, no, you can't do that. So you see, then he did it, and he said their corruption rate is not 1 or 2%, 1,000%. And I have got a personal experience. At one of my brothers used to work for the army. He said, brother, Bada Bhai, I mean elder brother, you leave your medicine practice, you become a contractor. I said, why should I become a contractor? He said, I give you a contract. I said, what? To carry the stones for our swimming pool, only 3 kilometer distance. I said, well, what is that? He said, no, he said, give me a budget. I said, it will be very 3 kilometers what? I said, maybe 300 or 600. He said, no, elder brother, go in the millions. That is the quote you quote, and I give you a guarantee you will get it. So this is the way, because as these are not been audited publicly, so militarizations, we all have to be careful in the democracy. You see, country like Bangladesh, the question remains, a country which fought against Pakistani regime, against militarizations. Why they are doing it? Is it because of the fear that Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, our leader, was been killed by few army officers? Is that the reason? No. The reason is this is the collusion between corrupt so-called Democrats and the army, so that the army will not be able to fight anything. So they will be involved as part and parcel of the corruption. That destroys a country, that destroys a nation. We all, militarization has killed Pakistan, it may kill Bangladesh as well, maybe in a different fashion. You see, what happens now? Now really, they are really keeping the army happy. They are involved them in every aspect, whereas diplomacies and other, they are few. That is nothing wrong in it. Now the most worst thing is that they made the ranks of major generals are equivalent to secretaries. Previously, only the chief of army was equivalent to a secretary or even additional secretary. So we have many secretaries been created with one promotions. And really they have been always been transferred as the superintendent of the government public hospitals, public medical colleges, so that after their retirement or early retirement, they are all been inducted into the civilian life. So this is the way these sorts of, like a widow marriage, or really these sorts of mismarriage, so they are trying to control the duration. Instead of defending the borders, they are now much more been involved in looting the national wealth.
One of the largest components of the British Indian Army before 1947, the whole of the 20th century up till 1947, was the Muslim Punjabi component. That was amongst the largest in the British Indian Army. Now, when the new state of Pakistan was created in 1947, Punjab was, in terms of population, the biggest chunk. It was the military arm of the British Indian Empire. So from the beginning, because of reasons of history, the military component, the militant component, was very strong in the new state of Pakistan, if we leave East Pakistan aside. Bad choices over many decades were made by the Pakistan Army, by the Pakistani military. Certain choices were forced upon the military. At least Bangladesh should raise a statue to Pakistani militarization, because the twin fathers of Bangladeshi independence are Pakistani militarization and the fraternal help from India. There were bad choices, I think many Pakistanis would agree, that were made by the military regime of General Ziaul Haq. Leaving the democracy debate aside, the Afghanistan problem, which arose because of the entry of, first because of the communist coup over there, and then later, a year and a half later, because of the entry of Soviet troops, that created a geopolitical crisis in which the entire Western world jumped in, and Pakistan was right there, the neighbor, and Pakistan willy-nilly became embroiled in that crisis. There were certain things which Pakistan could have avoided. It did not avoid them and played an active role in that crisis, for which it has paid a very heavy price over the subsequent years. Now, when histories of Pakistan used to be written, the narrative usually used to be that army interventions have led to the various crises of the Pakistani state. Now, up to a point, that may all be true. But presently, the situation which Pakistan faces now, if many of Pakistan's problems were created by militarization, Pakistan currently has been saved by militarization. Pakistan faced a threat which a year back, 2 years back, 3 years back, not many countries faced. Nowadays, everyone talks about and hears about the Islamic State of Syria and the Levant. But the major threat then, after 9/11, was that form of radical Islamist extremism whose base was Afghanistan and which had come across the border, the porous border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and it had a large presence, some visible, some invisible, in Pakistan. So then the word, the current, the term that was in vogue was Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and Islamic terrorism. And the problem was located in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And whatever Afghanistan's problems, that was a mortal threat to Pakistan, the nature of the Pakistani state was under challenge. It was being threatened by the forces of Islamic radicalism, and the problem had got out of hand. There was the army, the present army. There was democracy in place, but the politicians, for any number of reasons, were paralyzed. They could not take a decision. They could not take a decision that this force has to be fought. The army also was not taking a decision. It launched one or two operations against terrorist locations. They had almost established states, running states within the borders of Pakistan. This was so in Swat, geographically to the north of Pakistan, and this was so in what is known as the tribal areas, the federally administered tribal areas, or FATA in short. To all intents and purposes, they were running independent emirates or independent republics. And Pakistan, geographically, they were part of Pakistan. But in actual terms, they had passed out of the control of Pakistan. And the Pakistani army, a strong army, a powerful army, almost 600,000 strong, a nuclear power, a strong military, not able to take any action. The civilians had abdicated authority and decision-making last year. So in fact, democracy had abdicated decision-making. Now this was a vacuum created into which the army stepped in. And since last year, the middle of last year, the army is now fighting a war, now taking decisions which were not being taken before. They went into areas which were considered too dangerous to enter. The army has suffered heavy losses. It continues to suffer heavy losses. But all this is one reason. First, the decision to go in. Second, the blood being lost and shed. The profile of the army in Pakistan has gone up like this. In General Musharraf's time, and it wasn't too long ago, and not in the tribal areas, but in the cities of the Punjab, army officers were told not to wear uniforms, not to go in uniform into bazaars and into towns, and large towns even. That was the kind of profile which the army had then. And now today, the army is right there. And the most popular man in the country is the army commander-in-chief. So that's a strange kind of a thing. When I was growing up, we were students. The article of faith that used to be on our heads was that once elections are held, once democracy is in place, Pakistan's problems will disappear. Now, that was about 40 years ago. So Pakistan has come, I think, full circle. It has gone through periods of military rule. It has, now it has a democratically elected government. But we're also seeing the resurgence and the rise of the army in public standing and public esteem. How has this affected policing? Policing, the law and order situation in Pakistan was very bad, and Pakistan was amongst the most dangerous countries on the planet. This was so as recently as last year. Everything hasn't been pacified. The situation is not all that perfect, but things have improved, and most Pakistanis realize it. Our largest city, Karachi, it had a different kind of a law and order situation. And there was a democratically elected, a democratically established political party which was running a terrorist outfit which had Karachi, this large city, in its grip. That stranglehold over Karachi, that has been broken. Again, because of the army and because of the action taken by it. So this is now the situation. Coming very specifically to policing, one of the problems of Pakistani policing has been political interference. The concept of political authority in Pakistan, the police under your control, unless you can appoint district police chiefs of your choice, and unless you have an inspector general of the police of a particular province who is your man and who jumps to your dictates, your political authority is not complete. The military has never had a problem with this thing. And paradoxically, whenever there has been a military regime in power, they may have done other things, but they have not been paranoid about police postings. Whenever we have elected governments, as is the case now, then one of the great preoccupations is that we must have police officers and station house officers, the lowermost rung of the police, of their own choice. And I've been an MNA, a member of parliament. Perhaps I also may have been guilty of the same sin. But assembly members in Pakistan also do not think that they are full members of parliament unless they can have police officers of their choice in their constituencies. Now, this problem is exacerbated, paradoxically and very ironically, when you have an elected government in place. So military men, they've not had a problem with this kind of a thing. One of the first attempts at serious police reform was made by General Musharraf when he came to power. Now, his reasons may have been different. On paper, it was a good reform, and you have a copy of it in your dossiers, which are there with you, called the Police Order 2002. It was partially implemented, and some key aspects of it, which would have ensured public monitoring of the functioning of the police, those aspects were not implemented. So it was a half-baked affair about which a lot of noise was made, but it really did not lead to the results which were expected or which were desired. Policing now needs urgent reform in Pakistan. There is no doubt about it. From 1947 onwards, in 1947, policing was a very simple affair in the then Pakistan. The police force was small, police stations were few, but the authority of the state, the authority of the police was much greater. And I come from a part of the Punjab where a single policeman going to a village could enforce any order that he liked. Such was the social structure of Pakistan at that time. So taking the police force and policing for granted, the kind of attention that should have been paid to law and order was not paid. All of our effort went into upgrading the military, in giving the army, in developing the army. The external alliances which Pakistan forged, they also benefited the army. So the army grew, and today, perhaps certainly the most powerful, perhaps the most efficient, the institution which can deliver the most is the army. Now, that kind of attention was not paid to the police. Punjab is the largest province of Pakistan, and its police force numbers about, the number is about 160,000 active people on duty. The British Army today is about 70 to 80,000. So which means the numbers of the Punjab police are bigger than the British Army. So it's a huge force. But the kind of the kind of Hong Kong police that it should be and that a country like Pakistan requires. We are still very far from that. There is, I think, every government which comes in says that we will give attention to police reform. Now, this is an undertaking which every incoming government makes and which every incoming government then disavows. So this is something that needs to be done.
Why, as I said before, that in 2002, Indonesia separated the police from the armed forces. Before, the armed forces were consist of Army and then Navy and Air Force. But that is what in terms of organizational structure. The question is that whether in terms of culture, then the police has changed from the military style. Yeah. It should be recognized that to date there has no research on whether the police actually has changed their culture from the military style into the civilian police. But what's become the fact is actually after the police was spirited from the military forces, then the Indonesian people became there to fight against the police brutality, against the police violations against human rights and so on. But if we look at back that actually the amalgamation the police into the military forces returned back to 1965, yeah, after the rebellion of Communist Party, and then the military governments became in place, and then it governs until 1998 when the people power through the military government and then changed into the democratic regimes. Now, what's happened with the increasing threat of terrorism and then fundamentalism, yeah, actually the military asked to be given authority to deal with some security matters, yeah, against terrorism and fundamentalism. But of course now, because the police has become independent, the police then refuse. And to date, in the Indonesian Parliament, there is still debate whether we will give authority to the military forces to deal with the security matters. Yeah, most of course civil society's elements refuse, and also the police itself also refuse. But the biggest challenge in the policing reform now is how actually to eradicate the corruption practice which is still rampant in the police organization. Yeah, as I said before, that one of the plan is that to cut the police function in administrative tasks in issuing driving license and vehicle registration, because that is the sort of the corruptions in the police forces. Yeah, and the other thing is that to adopt as many as possible anti-torture measure in our new penal code and also in our criminal procedural codes. Yeah, to limit the authority of the police. Yeah, in investigating any crimes with torture and so on. But what's become debate today also in our society, whether we will maintain the right or the authority to the police to detain until 20 days and then extend it until 40 days for any or against any suspects which are suspected to commit crimes which threat more than 5 years in jail. That is what become debate. We actually, some of us, the parliamentary members, tends that to shorter the authority of the police to detain the suspect, yeah, from 20 maybe to becomes only 7 days, and then also to limit the police authority in dealing with some crimes, like for the narcotic user, for the drug user, pure drug user, then no, we propose to give not to the police but to the special agency on drug and narcotic. That is what I can tell.
Thank you. On arrest, detentions, and things like that, once the police make the arrest, what kind of authority does the judiciary have? How long after arrest can the judiciary will see the arrestee, and on when can they make any orders on the arrest, legality or illegality of arrest? Then the second question is regarding Pakistan. That is, actually very deep insight into the Pakistani situation that was made. Now the question is, now the military has established its popularity on the by being able to control terrorism. Now, what next? Will military continue to be in that position and thereby virtually for a long time challenge the civilian authority? Will there be a return to civilian authority? And if the civilian, if there is such a this thing, how much of real power will the civilian authorities capable of exerting in the country?
Thank you. So under our current criminal procedural code, police has authority to arrest and to detain the suspect for crime with threat of 5 years and more in prisons. Yeah, for the first time is 20 days, and this is absolutely based on the discretion of the police. Yeah, and then if the police has not completed the dossier of the case, then the police can ask to the district attorney office, yeah, for the extension of 40 days. But of course, the suspect or his family can challenge this arrest and detainment through what we call as pra-peradilan, something like habeas corpus, yeah, in the U.S. system. So then, if then the courts, yeah, grants the challenge, then the police should release, of course, yeah. But in total, under our current criminal procedural rule, after the police arrest for maximum 60 days, and then actually the district attorney office, yeah, can also continue the detainment for 30 and 30 days, yeah, and then the court, the first instance, goes for 30 and 30 days until there is a judgment from the what we try to change. Even recently, our constitutional court even gave a constitutional right to the people to challenge not only the arrest, but also the stipulation of suspect. So once we are declared a suspect by the police or other law enforcers, we can challenge it in the court, actually. And now it is permitted based on constitutional court judgment.
Civilian authority have not been disturbed in Pakistan. The constitution is in place, parliament is in place, there's a free press, there's a vibrant civil society. The substance of power has shifted. And now in the Pakistan of old, in the Pakistan of 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the army by now would have seized power. The commander-in-chief of the army would have been commanding the army and the country. So this is, I think, a sign of either greater sophistication or a sign of some kind of political maturity. But the civilian space has to exert itself a bit more. These charges of corruption, which are common to so many countries, they are to be found in Pakistan too. And if the army is the most functioning institution in the country, the civilians, I think, also have to rise to the challenge and give a direction not only to the army but to the state to describe Pakistan's challenges, because Pakistan's problems are very serious. Afghanistan, the Taliban, the Islamic State is trying to find a presence in Afghanistan. The Muslim world is in turmoil. Look at Iraq, look at Syria, Yemen. The entire region is disturbed. And Pakistan would have been a candidate for the same kind of instability if those decisions had not been taken last year. So that is why it's now the situation has changed. But your question as to what will happen, Pakistan is going through a transitional phase, and it has this system where there is the shadow of power and then the substance of power. Now, how this is reconciled, we'll have to see over the next 2 or 3 years.
Bangladesh, since its independence in 1971 till today, if I separate it in two phases, first is the 70 to 90, the first 20 years, 15 years was the military rule, only 5, except the first 5 years. And then 90 onward until today, it has been democracy, meaning elected government was there. But we have experienced something, not a classical martial law, but a neoclassical martial law in 2007 to 2009 for 2 years, where a civil government was in power, backed by the military. So military was in the behind, but they had total control over, ruling of the country in every way. In Bangladesh, what I see, because of the militarization in the police force, we have seen within the law enforcement agencies, the Rapid Action Battalion, RAB, it is part of the police force, which is called the elite force, comprised of the military officers, bringing military people inside. And they have been given a tremendous power and actually license to kill. And they have a tremendous power in the law enforcement agencies. So the entire idea of having a military to face the external enemies and using police or the military to fight or combat terrorism internally, the mindset has been different. But we don't see the same situation in India or in many countries. And where Mr. Ayaz also said that during the military rule, military was not interested in police posting in different areas. But when it comes to the elected government, the political parties, somehow they have interest in police posting in their own localities. The simple reason is because sticking to power or having the total control by using muscle power, by using the gunpowder. And military didn't have the interest is simply because military has more powerful weapons than the police. So they don't need, they have no interest in police posting because they've got their own guns, which is more powerful than the police. But what I want to understand from Mr. Ayaz, if Pakistan was, or if Pakistan did never had a military rule since its independence, would there be the same situation today? Would would the popularity for military would still be there? Could a democratic government till today could fight terrorism and Islamic fundamentalism in the same way if Pakistan did not have to face military rule ever? What would be the situation?
Without military rule, many of Pakistan's problems would have been avoided. But Pakistan was, we must begin with this, it was an artificial construct. No Pakistan had ever existed in history before. No Bangladesh had existed. What is now Bangladesh was part of a North Indian empire which went up to Kabul. It was Bengal here and Kabul there. And now in the vivisection or the partitioning of 1947, this new state emerges. So it was beset by a sense of insecurity from the start. Are we going to be around? Are we going to survive? Because there was no historical reference or precedent that a Pakistan 500 years before had existed. None had. So it was always. So that sense of insecurity, coupled with so many other things, led to this, reinforcing and rearming the military arm. So the army became strong and it developed because there were other factors too, but this was the primarily the motivating factor. But had it only been militarization, the problem for Pakistan would not have been all that serious. It was militarization plus something much more potent, Islam, from which arose in 1978 after the Afghan problem all these concepts about holy war. Holy war in Afghanistan, holy war then in Kashmir, and that became the guiding philosophy of the Pakistan Army. So a force which should have been the which should have been the most powerful secular force in Pakistani society. After all, this was not an Islamic army, this was a British army, a British created army, as much in Pakistan as in India, with officers going to messes in the evenings and having a drink and singing Old Lang Syne. So that was, and the names of army units in India and Pakistan, they continue to be the names that existed in the British Indian Army. The so-and-so 11 Punjab and 15 Punjab and all, they're all old British names. Now this should have been a secular force in Pakistan. And it was a secular force up till General Yahya Khan's time. But it went, now Islam and holy war distorted everything. And then mixed up with the Taliban problem. And the Taliban problem morphing into 9/11. Finally, Pakistan is moving away not just from that, but from all this concept of holy war. It is now fighting, the Pakistan Army is now fighting the biggest flag bearers of holy war. Because the ultimate flag bearers are the Taliban and now the Islamic State. And the Pakistan Army finally is ranged against them. Now this is a historic shift. So when we had the democracy of Senator Farooq Naik's party, then the supreme authority was the Supreme Court. Yes. Because the Supreme Court was not allowing his government to function. So we had an elected parliament, elected president, elected prime minister, and we had a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who was behaving like more of an army chief than the present army chief. If the Chief Justice had been the army chief now, I think the army would have taken over power. Is that right or not? Right. This was very much a secular army, but one thing, a country with an army with a country. The Pakistan Army in 1947 was very small, which was hived off from the Indian Army. So Pakistan, the new state, created this huge army. The army did not create Pakistan. That is one. I mean, that has to be, I think, kept in mind. I think it's the kind of political developments that happen which shape so many things and go to change the thinking of people and institutions. When you talk about why did India take a separate course and why did Pakistan take a separate course, I think, and very briefly, let's not forget the historical context. All this discussion about the rule of law and this is taking place in a context which was, unfortunately, but for the right historical reasons, wasn't created by us people. It was something that came from outside. It was our external experience which brought us into contact with the need for constitutions, the need for political parties, the concept of freedom of speech, the concept of the rule of law. Historically in India, as we all know, the kind of what we understand now by the rule of law did not exist. It was autocracy or absolutism in their purest forms. So these came from outside. Now, the British happened to come first to Bengal. And overall, they were in Calcutta for how many years? What was the total British? In about 350 years. So, and from Calcutta, they slowly came westwards. This part, which is now Pakistan, the British were here only for 98 years. And this was, by the way, the frontier, the far-flung frontier of the British Indian Empire. When were Balochistan and Sindh ever considered part of of the Indian Empire? Punjab certainly, Lahore certainly, Peshawar to some extent because it was a part of Kabul, but the rest of Pakistan wasn't. So India had the benefit of the British experience. Some parts of India for 300 years, some for 200 years. So here it was in a very, very rudimentary form, and I also mentioned that the army was always a strong thing and the sense of insecurity. But you must appreciate also the fact that whereas religious extremism is becoming a fashion in some places where it wasn't the fashion, and I'm not naming any names, here in Pakistan, I mean, we were the original inventors of holy war. We are moving away from that. So you see the progression, something happening, something different happening elsewhere, and something where you could least have expected it to happen in Pakistan, now it's happening. I mean, Pakistan having felt the fire, tasted the fire, having been in it, is now coming out of it.
There are a lot of factors, but one would be the failure of the post-EDSA or post-Marcos governments to prosecute and to hold fully accountable the Marcos and his family members for all the crimes they committed against the Filipino people. So, for instance, with respect to the corruption Now, there has been, it's generally seen that a big portion of the estimated $10 billion that the Marcos family accumulated in ill-gotten wealth remains intact in overseas, in secret accounts overseas. So the effort to recover over the years has not been that good. With respect to the human rights violations, no case in Philippine courts has ever succeeded in producing a conviction. It was only a court in the U.S. That came out with a ruling declaring that victims of human rights violations under Marcos were entitled to some form of compensation. And even politically, because of this, because of the the impunity, basically because of the impunity with respect to the Marcoses, the wife of Ferdinand Marcos is currently, in fact, a member of Congress, so a colleague of mine in Congress. The daughter is the governor of their home province, and the son is a senator and has announced that he's interested in running for the presidency or vice presidency. So that's, and to the charges that you and your family are corrupt, you plundered the economy, you committed human rights violations, they can always say, no, this has never been proven in court. The other is also a failure of the educational system. So this is one of the deficiencies of our educational system, that which just reflects the lack of a consensus on viewing the Marcos regime and the martial law period as a dark period in Philippine history. So that's why in our textbooks, the approach taken is generally, well, on the one hand, martial law was bad. On the other hand, Marcos did construct all of these highways and bridges and so on and so forth. So, so this is the reason why, especially now, generations of Filipinos can have that view that, well, all in all, we can maybe say he was the best ever president. So these are some of the factors to explain why you have that experience. Of course, from our point of view, from my point of view, I represent what would be considered left-wing trade unions in teacher trade unions in the Philippines. Of course, we deplore this situation in general.
Actually, when army leaves the power, then they already had destroyed every institutions. So it is very difficult to stand on that. And they have their cronies also over there, who they like to have the military or autocratic kind of government. So because they get the benefit out of it. So it becomes very difficult for the civilians to assert their power or to have some kind of democratic functioning. In the context of Pakistan, one can find that still we spend very less amount on the social sector, but a big chunk of the budget goes to the military expenditure. And besides that, in the national budget, the perks of the military like pension and medical, these things are not being paid through the defense budget, but this is from the civilian budget. So they dictate. So this is a process where civilians have to fight with the support of the civil society. But they don't want to align themselves, the civilians, don't want to align with the civil society. They want to align themselves with the military power.